The Girl Between Two Worlds by Scarlett Eva Williams. Chapter 3. Under the Sound of Bells. That day, the sky was gray and the monastery bells were ringing especially loudly. At the time, it seemed to me that they were ringing just for us. My mother and I walked along a narrow road towards the monastery gates. The stone walls rose high, as if separating this world from another. When the heavy gates closed behind us, the sound of the bells was still echoing over the monastery. I did not know that at that moment the door to my former life was closing. Someone told us, "First go to the church, you need to receive a blessing from the abbess," before we could be placed in the dormitory. We entered the church. It was cool and quiet inside. The smell of incense filled the air. Candles were burning. Everything around us felt strict and solemn. I looked at the icons, the golden lamps, the nuns who moved almost silently. Then we were led to the abbess. She sat in a large chair that looked like a throne. Soft cushions were placed beneath her. Around her stood nuns who looked at her with deep respect. At that time, I did not yet know that this woman would become one of the most difficult trials of my childhood. She spoke with my mother for a few minutes. Her voice was calm, but there was no warmth in it. I stood nearby and listened. Then my mother quietly said, "Come here, take the blessing." I stepped forward. According to Orthodox tradition, one had to bow and kiss the abbess's hand. Everyone did this, adults and children alike. It was a sign of respect. I bowed. The abbess extended her hand. I looked at it for several seconds, and suddenly something inside me stopped. I could not kiss it. I simply stood there. My mother whispered softly, "Esther," but I did not move. In the monastery, such things happened very rarely. Children usually did what they were told immediately, but I did not. I was very young then and could not explain what I was feeling, but my heart already knew how to recognize something very important: love and the absence of it. The abbess noticed my hesitation. Her face changed. She looked at me coldly and said, "If the child does not want to receive a blessing, then she is not ready for communion." She turned to the nuns. "Tomorrow she will not receive communion." This was the first punishment of my monastery life. I did not fully understand what had happened, but I felt that in their eyes I had done something wrong, and yet inside me there was no shame. There was only a strange feeling, as if I had protected something very important within myself. Later, I would learn that this abbess was strict with everyone, but especially with those who did not submit immediately. She could be lenient only toward herself. Toward others, she rarely showed love. From that day on, punishments became part of my life. I would be deprived of communion, deprived of sweets, deprived of holidays, deprived of trips. Sometimes I would even be punished for things I had not done. This was how the monastery tried to humble my character, my fiery Italian temperament, my love of freedom, and the upbringing I received from my Iranian father, the man who allowed me to laugh, run, and be myself. But they did not know one thing. You can teach a child to speak quietly. You can force them to walk slowly. You can punish them for disobedience. But you cannot force a heart to stop being free. And on that day, under the sound of monastery bells, my new life began. A life in which I would have to learn to protect my heart, even when I was only a little girl. Chapter 4. Monastery Walls. Life in the monastery began very early. At 6:30 in the morning, it was still dark. Outside the windows there was a cold silence, and only the ringing of the bells broke the sleep. Wake up. That sound meant you had only a few minutes to get up, get dressed, and make it to the morning prayers. In the monastery, you were not allowed to be late. Everything had consequences. If you were late, it was considered disobedience, and disobedience had to be corrected. At first, I could not understand how anyone could wake up so early. My body was still that of a child. I wanted to sleep, to stay under the blanket just a little longer. But fear teaches discipline quickly. I was so afraid of oversleeping that I invented my own method. I went to bed bed already wearing my tights. It seemed to me that if I slept in my tights, I could get dressed faster and would not be late. It was a small trick of a small girl trying to survive in a world of strict rules. We lived in an orphanage for girls, a separate building on the monastery grounds. My mother could come to see me only with the abbess's blessing. During the first weeks, she also worked in the orphanage. Sometimes I saw her and it made me feel calmer. But later we were separated. My mother stayed in the monastery and I remained in the orphanage. Now her visits depended only on the abbess's decision. Whenever my mother did manage to come see me, I always asked the same question. "Mom, will I wake up in time tomorrow at 6:30? She would smile, stroke my head and say, "Of course you will." But I still worried. And again, I went to bed wearing my tights. We dressed quickly and went to the church for morning prayers. Sometimes I stood there barely able to keep my eyes open. The lamps burned quietly, the nuns read prayers, and outside the sky was just beginning to grow light. But the real fear came later. During the meal, in the monastery, food was also part of discipline. If you were late for prayer, you could be punished during breakfast. They would give you a piece of bread, and you had to stand through the entire meal. Stand and watch the others eat. You were not allowed to sit. You were not allowed to speak. You simply had to stand. And when everyone finished, only then could you sit down and eat what was left, cold food. I stood like that several times, and each time it felt like it lasted forever. I looked at the tables, the plates, the girls who were calmly eating, and felt a hot wave rising inside me. My character was not made for silence and submission. I was a child who was used to running, laughing, making noise. A child whose father lifted her into the air and spun her around the room. And now I stood with a piece of bread in my hand and learned to remain silent. In the monastery, they said this was how humility was taught, but my heart felt something different. Inside me, something else was growing. Not humility, a quiet protest. Sometimes standing there with that piece of bread, I closed my eyes and remembered my father. And then it seemed to me that somewhere inside me, freedom was still alive, even behind the monastery walls.